Welcome everyone. This is your first installment of maternity leave lectures. Today we are going to be talking about innate immunity. But before we get started, I wanted to let you know a little bit about what's going on here. If you hear any strange noises, rustling, meowing, I want you to see who is to blame. These are my boys, Buster on the left, Bo on the right. And they are nice companions, but they don't quite understand why I need to be working from home. So if you hear anything strange going on, you know who to blame. Now that we have those formalities out of the way, I'd like to start talking to you about innate immunity. This is going to be installment 1 of 2. As we talk about innate immunity, there are host defenses that any microbe that's trying to invade the human body has to get through. The first line of defense is the barriers that block entry of the microbe to the body. So this would be any place that we talked about before. It's a portal of entry. So we're going to talk about the methods that our body uses in order to prevent that microbe from getting into a portal of entry. The second line of defense is not specific, meaning it does not target any specific pathogens. But instead of being just generalized defenses that block entry, this is an internalized system of protective cells. So these are specific cells that do the work of going around acting as sentinels to try and destroy microbes before they can take hold and cause infection. Some of the topics that we'll be talking about in the second line of defense are inflammation and phagocytosis. The third line of defense that we'll be talking about in the second lecture, this is what we call acquired or specific immunity. This acquired or specific immunity develops to very specific pathogens. So this is where we're going to be talking about B cells and T cells that you might have heard of before, and also antibodies. What's great about the third line of defense is that it can provide long-term immunity. So in many cases, once you've been exposed to a microbe like a virus one time, your body produces antibodies to it that can come back and attack that microbe if you were infected a second time. This is how all of these host defenses fit together. We will be talking today about these innate or non-specific defenses. In our first segment, we'll talk about the first line of defense. In the second segment, we will talk about the second line of defense. Then the next lecture will be acquired or specific immunity, where we will talk about the third line of defense. I mentioned that the first line of defense are these barriers that keep microbes from even entering your body. There are so many of them that we can't fit all of them into one lecture, and I do not expect you guys to memorize all of the different first line of defense barriers. Keep in mind, however, that this first line of defense goes along with the portals of entry that we talked about before. So the first line will protect your body from microbes even entering it. Things that are included in your first line of defense are, of course, your skin. This is your tough outermost layer on your body. It's thick. It helps to protect you from water, from other invaders. And the only time that you can get past it is if the skin is broken. So if you have a cut or a scrape, any kind of open wound. Other places where you have lines of defense, again, are other portals of entry we mentioned before. such as the mucous membranes. And these mucous membranes are found all over the body. Of course, you think of the mouth, the nose, the eyes as being mucous membranes, but you also have the urinary and respiratory tracts to think of. These places are great at avoiding microbes entering because of the mucus, just like is in the name, that is found in these locations. Mucus is thick, and the microbes, if it enters mucus, microbes can get stuck in the mucus and will have a hard time making it actually into your cells. If we're looking specifically at the respiratory tract now, so say we get through the mucus, okay, mucus again helps to flush any microbes out. If microbes try to get into the mucus, they get stuck there. Well, other things about the respiratory tract that help to prevent microbes from entering is actually nasal hair. Nasal hair can trap particles before they get into your trachea and into your lungs. Coughing and sneezing are also reflexes that help to prevent microbes from entering your respiratory system. You have epithelial cells, so those are cells on the lining of your respiratory tract, that have small hairs called cilia. These cilia trap foreign particles that make it down through your trachea into your on the way to the lungs. Okay, the cilia also have mucus around them, and all of these things help to trap microbes and propel them back out so that they do not make it into your lungs. This is what those cilia look like. If you take a look at this picture right here, and if you were to zoom in on those epithelial cells in your trachea, you would see small hairs. They're so small that microbes can get trapped in them, and those help to propel microbes back up the trachea instead of down into your lungs. Even your genitourinary tract can help protect you from microbes. Yes, urine we think of as just kind of a bodily function, a way to get rid of any excess or unwanted liquid materials that we need to get rid of. But urine can actually be a way of flushing microbes out of your body so that they do not take hold and cause infection. So urinating frequently is an important way to prevent urinary tract infections. Waiting too long to go to the bathroom can actually encourage bacteria to grow. Similarly, vaginal secretions provide the cleansing power for the lower reproductive tract. Okay, so any secretions that happen to come out of there, including menstruating, can help to cleanse your tract of bacteria and other microbes. One of the things that we've talked about before in previous lectures are those normal microbiota, so the normal microbes that colonize your body. We mentioned them before because they are very helpful in preventing infection. They live all over the body. We talked about the different places that you can find them. They're on the skin, gastrointestinal tract, respiratory tract, all over the place. What they do is they block access of pathogens to those epithelial surfaces. So all of those surfaces we talked about, skin, mucous membranes, things like that. They create unfavorable environments for pathogens, so that's that antagonism that we mentioned before. Some of the ways that they create this antagonism is by competing for nutrients. So if your resident microbiota, if your normal bacteria, are using up all of the nutrients, that doesn't leave any nutrients left over for pathogens to take. These microbes can also alter the pH of the location where they're hanging out. So for example, in the vaginal tract, there are microbes called there are lactic acid bacteria in the vaginal tract. That helps to lower the pH, make it more acidic, so that other microbes that could be pathogens will not take hold. Also, on your skin and mucous membranes, there are different secretions that can help to protect you from microbes. For example, on your skin, you have sebaceous secretions. These are kind of the oily secretions that you get. These have an antimicrobial effect, so that can help protect your skin from microbes taking hold. You also have an enzyme called lysozyme that's found in your tears and saliva. What it does to help prevent pathogens is it can break down the peptidoglycan in the cell walls of bacteria. So if the cell walls are being broken down, then the bacteria are more susceptible to changes in the environment and can end up breaking apart before causing infection. Finally, I mentioned lactic acid already with the vaginal secretions, but you can also produce lactic acid and more electrolytes in your sweat. When you sweat, that actually lowers the pH, and that can repel many microbes. The next step that I'd like to talk about are other body systems that are involved in immune defenses. So we talked about that outermost barrier, the skin, the mucous membranes, and all of those outermost barriers that protect your portals of entry from getting microbes into your body. Now let's talk about internal body systems that are involved in your immune defenses. The two body compartments that we're going to talk about today are your lymphatic system and your bloodstream. And one of the things that I want you guys to know about this is some of the differences between your lymphatic system and your bloodstream. Okay, these are just overviews of the entire circulatory system, which is your blood system, the lymphatic system, and then as a comparison on the far right here of both systems together. So comparison, contrasting, and then also showing you how they work together in order to work in your immune system. Let's start off by talking about the lymphatic system. Its main purpose is to act as a drain-off system for the inflammatory response, which is what we're going to talk about in the second installment of innate immunity. It renders surveillance, recognition, and protection against foreign materials through a system of immune cells and antibodies. So basically what this is saying is that your lymphatic system is a way to circulate all of your immune cells and immune functions throughout your body. There is some circulation of immune cells in your blood, but the lymphatic system is the main way that they travel. Lymph is the fluid that travels through your lymphatic system, and it can transport all kinds of things. It can transport white blood cells that we'll talk about are involved in the immune system. It can transport fats, cellular debris, so as pathogens, as microbes are being broken down by your immune system, the dead parts of them have to travel and get out of your body somehow, so they travel through your lymphatic system. The lymphatic system can also transport infectious agents that have somehow made it into your tissue and spaces. Okay, so they get picked up by the lymphatic system and they can be transported out. One of the differences between your blood and your lymphatic vessels, okay, so this is one of those key things that I want you guys to know about, is that lymph, that fluid that we were just talking about that moves through your lymphatic system, only moves in one direction. It moves from the extremities, so from your arms and feet, to your heart. So the lymph only moves from outward to inward. This is very different than your circulatory system. As we know, the blood is pumped not only out from your heart, but also back to your heart and lungs in an attempt to oxygenate the blood. Okay, so one big difference. Another thing that's very different between them too is how they are pumped. Lymph is only transported through the contraction of skeletal muscles. And this is definitely not the case with your blood. Your blood is pumped through the contraction of your heart. So lymph does not travel through your body just because your heart is beating. Lymph travels through your body when your skeletal muscles contract. So let's talk about the different organs and tissues that make up your lymph. These are things in your body that you've probably heard of before, maybe know a little bit about, but have never really understood the point of them. So we'll talk about the thymus, we'll talk about lymph nodes, the spleen, and then there's another type of tissue called miscellaneous lymphoid tissue, or MLT. Your thymus is one of the locations of your lymphatic system that we'll talk about again when we get to the third line of defenses, that specific immunity. Reason why is because this is the place where T cells mature. Okay, the thymus is a triangular structure in the pharyngeal region, so that's around your lungs. It's largest at birth, but it still continues to grow until you hit puberty, and then it stops growing. So you can see this picture of a baby. Again, this is largest in proportion to the rest of your body. You find it around the lungs, and it continues to grow through puberty, but then it starts to level off. This is the site where your T cells are going to be produced. Your lymph nodes act as sentinels throughout the body. They're small encapsulated bean-shaped organs. So they're little bitty, they're shaped like beans, and you find them stationed in clusters along lymphatic channels in large blood vessels. Most of the time you will find them in aggregations in your armpit, your groin, and your neck. They're in locations that are ideal for filtering out materials that have entered the lymph system. The spleen is another lymph organ. Okay, this organ you'll find in the upper left portion of your abdominal cavity. So if you feel on your belly, it's in the upper left side of your gut. It serves as a filter for blood instead of lymph. But what it does is it removes worn out red blood cells from circulation. And this is important. If the red blood cells are worn out, then they need to be removed so that they don't start to cause any problems. In your immune system, their function is to filter pathogens from the blood. So as those red blood cells travel through your spleen, they are getting checked to see if they're worn out. Your spleen is also checking to see if there's any pathogens flowing along with it. Any pathogens that are flowing along with it will get stuck in the spleen and will be targeted for phagocytosis. That MLT that I told you about, the miscellaneous lymphoid tissue, these are just bundles of lymphocytes beneath the mucosa of gastrointestinal and respiratory tracts. What that means is that they are bundles of immune cells. Okay, so they're not really distinct structures like those lymph nodes, but they're bundles of lymph cells that you find underneath the mucous membranes in your gut and in your respiratory tract. You can even find them in your breasts. So you'll find MLTs in the tonsils, in the breasts, and Peyer's patches. Now that we've talked about the lymphatic system, let's talk about the blood system. And again, what I want you to keep in mind is what are the differences between the lymph system and the blood system. That includes its purposes and what they're made of. So let's first talk about the blood system by talking about what it's made of. If you were to take a vial of whole blood and look at it under the microscope, you would see that whole blood is made of blood cells, and there's several different blood cells that we'll talk about, suspended in plasma. Okay, plasma is a clear, can be kind of yellowish fluid. So it's basically just the fluid that your blood cells are bathed in. Okay, you might have heard of something called blood serum. Well, serum is basically the same thing as plasma, except serum has the clotting factors removed from it. So we can actually use serum in immune testing and therapy. Once those clotting factors are removed, then we can get the serum and test it. So this is a difference. Would be the difference between blood plasma and blood serum. If you take whole blood and you centrifuge it, so spin it down so that the heavy things, including the blood cells, go to the bottom of the tube, this is basically what you would see. On the left-hand side here, this is blood that is unclotted. Okay? That means that there are no blood clots going on, that those clotting factors are still present in the plasma. That's why you have red blood cells on the bottom and blood plasma on top. That plasma still contains clotting factors. But if the blood is allowed to clot, the clotting factors then get removed from the plasma and only serum is left behind. So you have red blood cells at the bottom and blood serum at the top. Now all these blood cells that you find in whole blood originate from the same location. They originate from your bone marrow. And they all come from stem cells. So stem cells are undifferentiated cells, which means that these cells do not have a purpose yet. The ones that you find in bone marrow are precursors to different blood cells. And again, there's all kinds of blood cells. The type that we're going to pay the most attention to in the immune system are the leukocytes, or the white blood cells. Red blood cells also come from bone marrow. They're very important because they are what carry oxygen throughout your body. And platelets involved in clotting are also made from stem cells that originate in your bone marrow. This is a big outline of all of the different blood cells and their origins. What we talked about so far are right here. Okay, red blood cells and platelets, again, they come from stem cells that are in your bone marrow. What we're going to talk about in the next installment of the innate immune system are these right here. Okay, the ones that I'm highlighting. These are white blood cells that are involved in innate immunity. When we get to the third line of defense, specific immunity, we're going to be talking about these. Your B cells and T cells. Thank you for listening. This is the end of the first installment. I will come back with the second installment of innate immunity.